All right, everybody. Good morning. We are coming to you live from our studios in Johannesburg. It's very, very exciting. And we have none other than the lovely Phumi Mashaba here today as well. Morning. How you, Pums? You see, Phumi was saying earlier I had to turn down the music in her headphones. She's like, I can't turn it up so loud. It's very loud and you can't hear it, and then I get very grumpy because I'm old and my hearing is deteriorating. Oh my God. Rena showed me a picture of us 13 years ago.
Yay!
Here
I
with,
saw that.
With your son. Phumi Kaneho was like, he was a toddler.
He was holding my hand.
He was a little toddler.
Those pictures are amazing.
I found it very depressing.
You're silly. Why would you find it
depressing?
Well,
listen, I hate the idea of getting old. I mean, I just find the whole thing very, very...
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like upset about it. I mean, I realize it's part of the whole... So a friend of mine whose wedding I was the best man at sent me a very nostalgic number of messages. No, he was drunk the other night. So I'm in this group with him and two other friends, right? So he was posting all this music, and like you could hear he's talking to his wife in the background, and he's very nostalgic. So he says,
which is another side of
"Oh
getting
my
old."
God. Yeah. You're like hearkening back to the glory days, right?" So he goes, what did he say? He said something like, "Well, I'm going for a full physical tomorrow." So his whole company is paying for a full physical. So he goes for this medical checkup, and he said it's everything: MRI scans, the lot, right?
Is it for work? Is it for work insurance?
So work pay for this because he's in Canada. You know, here in South Africa, you'd be lucky if work even gives you the day off to go and have yours done, right? Anyway, he sends the thing, and he goes to this thing, and he says to me, "Oh, you know," and this is the line that got me. He's like, "Well, we're slowly making our way to the top of that hill. It's not long before we'll be going down the other side." I was like, you motherfucker. You know, here we are, and we were about to have the best time ever. We were about to have a nice conversation. I consider life just to have started for me, and here he is talking about the other side of that hill. I don't want to hear that.
I don't know if this is my best age in my mind, but I have always wanted to be older. I've always wanted to.
You have?
And not older as in I'm 18, I wish I was 21.
What, are you a psychopath?
But in my mind...
What, are you high?
What are you talking about?
You want to be
amazing.
old?
This is amazing. Everybody listens to you, right? At
No,
this age, of course they do.
Nonsense.
People listen to you. People think you're wise.
Yeah, they think you're wise.
They don't know better. And you know, when there are family meetings, you're in the family meeting, you're invited into the decision making. I don't know if this is the age that it was in my mind that was like the perfect older age.
So you feel like you're at the perfect age now?
Dude. So
I used to feel that way. I used to feel very, very positive and optimistic about being whatever age I was at was the best age I'd ever been. I really felt that. Yeah. About up to, I'd say 2019. So what, 4 years ago?
Okay.
And then since then, it's not a question of age. I don't feel physically any worse off. In fact, in some ways, I'm probably better. I think you're also wiser, right? So it's a combination of these effects. But when he said, like, you're getting to the top of that hill and then you're going to go down again, I was like, oh, for
Also, we're all, our health and the kind of person. So when people retire now, 65 or whatever the age is, you still have vitality in you.
Yeah.
Right. So you still have a good life. You still have none of the creaking bones. Although my friends and I had a conversation last week, as you all know, I was funeral duties last week.
Oh no! You see, this is a sign of getting old.
No.
Pull that thing a bit closer.
But we spoke about what it is that needs to happen, and the girls and I, we all decided that
yes,
because
there was almost like a stokvel within a stokvel where everybody had to contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was quite heavy.
It was quite heavy,
Yeah.
and I paid what I had. But we decided that at 65. you have to get like titanium hip replacement
Hmm.
and knee replacements.
Oh my God.
And then
Now
you've
we're
got
really talking about
25
old.
years. Then you've got 25 years and you can still do the vosho.
All right. Ugh, this is so. This is.
Vosho.
This
That's
is.
it.
I don't
Leave
like
vosho.
this. Okay, I really don't like this.
If you've got that, you've got it.
So we are playing with some new toys in the studio this morning, but we'll get to those in a second. Still figuring things out. Tina Turner, man. Oh God, I'm so depressed about this. You know, there are only a few artists in the world that I really, really, really loved because they're few and far between, and also kind of, you know, when you're 18, you really love a lot of music. You're like, oh, I've got 10,000 favorite bands and 10,000 favorite singers. But Tina Turner has been one of my favorite people for, I don't know, all my life. I mean, I can remember her songs as a kid. Songs like, We Don't Need Another Hero, you know?
Yeah, that's
Oh, and
peak 80s.
and Private Dancer and What's Love Got to Do and The Best, obviously, and all of these songs. I mean, those are just the top line.
One of
great
my
hits.
favorite Tina Turner songs is Barry White and Tina Turner. Oh, baby.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you know, because obviously I was too young to know about the Motown era and the stuff that she did when she was performing with Ike in the very beginning. But I mean, you know, she had Ain't No Mountain, Steamy Windows. Do you remember? Like there's some properly, absolutely incredible stuff there. And voice,
Tina's
the dancing.
voice,
What are you talking about? That
See, and do you know that Tina actually, when she decided that she is retiring from the scene, and then she did what they call a world tour. She never came down here, but she has been to South Africa, and she did a goodbye to her fans. And one of the things, I listened to a podcast with her talking about how all those dance moves and in those high heels, the toll that it took on her knees and her hips.
Oof.
That's why titanium.
Well, I mean, those knees and hips were famous, eh? The world over. Those legs were like they were some of the finest legs that God has ever graced a human being with. And when Tina Turner would walk downstairs, I mean, there was this video that you see last night. I went down the Tina rabbit hole. I was looking at a whole lot of stuff. This is part of how we mourn people that we love when they're not there anymore. And for those people who don't know why we're talking about Tina Turner, it's because Tina died last night at age 83 in Switzerland in her home. Funny thing is, I was thinking about her last week already.
Oh,
I mean, I think about her.
I think
about her all the time. Tina Turner is just one of those people. I often think like, because to me, her career was just perfect. So even though she went through a lot of trouble, and I mean, the poor woman was married to that monster Ike Turner, who was like, I didn't beat her, but if I did beat her, it was fair. It was in the parameters. It was below average, is what he said.
But also, he was always like super coked up.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like I have seen videos of them in the studio, and there's white powder everywhere.
When they talk about the Nutbush city limits, they're talking about like the area around Ike that was strewn with cocaine. But he was a monster. And then this poor woman had 2 of her children die before she died herself, which, I mean, for any parent, you know, that's got to be like one of the hardest things that any parent can go through. So I look at the story of Tina's, and it's filled with all of the ingredients of a great life and a great story.
Sure.
I mean, she grew up under segregation, civil rights era, performing.
Yeah, and I think
there were still venues.
Sharecroppers. So
they were sharecroppers. And she still, when she started performing, there were whites only and blacks only entrances and whites only, blacks only theaters. And like she had the proper full American experience, right? And then she obviously,
and then she had to fight for her image. And
that's right.
Music.
She was one of the first people to actually go to court to say you can't just
for her name.
Right. You can't just use my name. You can't just use my image. You can't use the silhouette of my body. You know, that
also,
big hair.
Because remember that her Turner name actually comes from Ike. Right? So
I want my royalties. Give me my royalties. God damn it. Don't make me come over there with my fists.
Telling you, a bad man.
Jesus,
Ooh,
what a
bad man is a
bad-
curse.
Well, bad husband.
Is a curse
Yeah.
in your life. And she went and she fought for it and she won.
Anyway, rest in peace, Tina. I'm not going to get all like sentimental and emotional here, but I will listen to her music a lot this weekend. That's the way I kind of, when it comes to the artists that you love, that's the way I get over it. I'm like, let me have a listening session, and I'll sit there and I'll turn it up loud.
And that's what's going to be. And also, right, because this is what happens is everybody is going to go down a Tina rabbit hole.
Yeah.
All the music, all the videos, all the stuff you've never seen before, which is what's so amazing.
That's what I wanted to tell you. Sorry. So in my Tina rabbit hole yesterday, sorry to interrupt you, but I watched that scene for Oprah's birthday when she arrived at John Travolta introduces her and she comes down those stairs. But because she's got those legs and also because the stairs are probably this narrow, she comes down sideways like a leopard, she comes down there. And I was like, Jesus, this woman is such a performer. It's like in her bones. Huh?
She's a gold standard.
They don't make them like that anymore. Right?
No, they don't.
Sure. What a
don't.
woman. What a woman. Anyway, God bless you, Tina, and thank you for all the years of incredible music. We're just we're in awe, is the only way to put it. And like I said earlier, I don't really care if Liza Minnelli hops the perch. I don't give a shit about that. I don't care about
Liza's still alive.
I don't know. Is she? Who knows? I don't really care about I didn't care about even though Whitney Houston is one of my favorite female vocalists of all time. When she died, it was kind of just sad and pathetic because of the whole, the whole story there. So obviously I was upset because we're like, but she was already dead 10 years before.
But Tina, right. Tina held it all together till the very last.
Yeah.
Like till the very last. She curated even how we're all going to remember her. We never saw Tina. After that last tour, we never saw Tina being a wrinkly old woman.
That's what I call that the only because she's the most recent one in living memory who orchestrated it so well, whether it was the people around her or her herself. But Barbara Walters did the same thing. She left The View on a high, which was it's a terrible show, but she invented it. And those harpies who are on it are just doing her memory no good. But she knew when to quit. She got off that stupid show, and you just never saw her again. And then you got this note that hey, here's a piece of paper. By the way, Barbara's gone. And it's just like, that's class. None of this long drawn out. Here we have to see her in the hospital with a fucking cap on and her dressing gown with big sunglasses. And none of that.
Oof.
It's just, it was respectful and decent. Like, you got to plan your exit properly. And if you're going to have a long drawn out illness at the end and you find out about it early enough, then just take the cameras away. Because people want to remember the best version of you.
Listen
and
here.
Tina left on a high. She decided, I'm done.
Auntie put it all together.
Yeah, she was magic. Magic. What a way to go. Okay, so a lot of people talking about Tina. She was a classy lady and a class act. There will never be another like her. Spot on, Tracy.
I also saw an interview with her once where she said why she chose rock and roll. Because rock and roll was always happy.
This guy reckons now the next challenge is to get me onto moisturizers and skin routine. The need for a kilogram of polyfiller is rather apparent now. White cracks. Go and fuck yourself.
It's too early.
Tina got all her wigs from a wig maker in Durban. Is that true?
Really?
I don't know.
Who is this wig maker in Durban?
So you'd know that. I love Simply the Best, says Kareen. Yeah, well, listen, what a song. Okay.
People are rude. Polyfiller.
Well, listen, I'm not as old as Tina Turner yet. God willing, I will get to that age. Such a privilege, says Carol Jean, to have seen her perform live in Cape Town all those years ago. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then Lebang brings up, our own Lebang says, world tours never include Africa, lol.
No, they never.
Well, yeah, they don't include.
Because it's so far.
Well,
Here in South Africa,
and now,
particularly.
like Hazel Feldman said when she was in the studio the other day, she's like, well, we can't afford because the dollar rand is so crap now that we can't bring these artists here. Now we have to have has-been washed up boy bands in order to sell tickets.
Just slow your roll on the has-been washed up boy bands.
I'm
Slow your roll.
I'm telling
slow
you,
your roll.
Booms, we're over them. All right.
What? Did you not see all the timelines awash with Backstreet Boys this past weekend?
I didn't see any of it because I don't think any of my friends posted anything like that. If they did go, they didn't tell me. And if they did go, I don't want to hear. It's that simple.
Awash with
all right.
Backstreet Boys.
The Rebellious Ruth says, I've lost all respect for Whoopi. Is that because of the view? I don't know. All right, then a couple of people. I loved Whitney, says Karine. She was also with Bobby Brown, who was a loser. Yeah, it's this.
Do you hear me about a bad man? In your life. Yeah. A curse.
We don't need that. Okay, so then a lot of people commenting here. Gareth, seriously, his face is shiny this morning. Hee. Okay, well, you know what? This is why I don't like changing things in the studio, because we've got this very weird camera angle where it unfortunately gets the mic stand in the way. And we didn't have time to rehearse this or test it out. So you're getting to be part of the first.
Part of the experience.
Right.
You all are part of the experience. We're figuring it out.
Either you enjoy it with us. I mean, here's George Meany says he thinks the camera setup is epic today. Listen, I didn't get into this business to be on fucking camera. And I don't even like, you know how I feel about television. You know how I felt about when we had cameras in here, when we started Cliff Central. I hated it, every second of it. I hate TV. I don't like being on camera. To me, the whole thing is imagination, the voice, theater of the mind. Yeah, so I am moving ahead with something I really don't like in order to please the audience. So if you're going to complain, you're just giving me the excuse to switch it off, right?
Don't do it, guys.
Yeah. I went to a Mexican party last night. Producer Ryan, I have such a great idea, says Rebellious Ruth. Huh.
What, a Mexican party?
Yeah. Tequila. Well,
on a Wednesday night.
Wednesday. Listen, you have to be very brave.
Wednesday night, huh?
To be very brave to hit Wednesday night tequilas. That's heavy going.
There was something on my timeline, at least, with a place in Bryanston that's got bottomless margaritas on a Sunday.
Hello.
From 12 to 8.
Someone needs to explain to me how people can do Sundays.
Bottomless margaritas.
It's not on.
I was just like, they're just setting up people's Mondays to be the worst ever.
No, I really don't like that. To me, Sundays takes the wind out of my sails if I have to do something on a Sunday. Well, you can't get me out of my house on a Sunday. It just isn't going to happen. I will not leave.
Not even for bottomless margaritas?
Not even. Not a chance. Will not be pulled out of my... Wild horses won't pull me out of my house on a Sunday. And it doesn't matter what. Like, you could have... Funny, I was talking to some friends of mine, like, what a music artist would actually get me out of my house? And, for especially in a winter, like, I'm not in a hurry to leave. You guys stream it, I'll watch it streaming. I'm happy with that. Don't you think?
So what's the answer? What answers will get you out of the house on a Sunday?
I could not think of on a Sunday. Nobody. Jesus couldn't come back and get me out of my house.
Well, he wouldn't. It doesn't even need to be a Sunday. Doesn't need to be a Sunday. Imvana can't get you anywhere.
Who would get you out of your house on a Sunday?
It doesn't take a lot to get me out of my house.
Really?
No, it just a bit of excitement, all of that stuff. But staying home on a Sunday is important to set the week out right for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm gonna have a good week, then I need the Sunday decompress. Also,
that's what I'm getting at. I need to spend one day of the week without people and without work. Like, it's just maybe I am actually deep down inside an introvert. Maybe that's because I always wonder when people are, I'm an introvert, and I go, yeah, you're not. You're not an introvert. You talk about yourself way too much,
too introverted to say.
And you're out there with people. You need people. You can't exist on your own. And then I hear people saying that they're extroverts, but they're half and half. I think I'm half and half. I really do. But the introvert part of me needs a day. Just need just one day where I can just be around the house doing whatever the hell I want. That's what I want. That's Sundays. All right. Well,
I don't think I'm half and half. I think I'm all the way out extrovert.
Yeah, I think you are. You got that bubbly personality. So you were talking about that funeral thing, and you were saying how you were worried last week because there was this unexpected expense, and it was quite a lot of money. And then it seems to me that what you hinted at just now is that you have forgotten how to stretch money.
I have not forgotten how to stretch money. I think we all have a warped sense of what money is actually. Because, so this comes from this whole week. Everybody's been talking about this 12.5 million rand with Herman Mashaba and Prince Mashele. And I kept thinking, 12.5 million rand? Guys, that is a hell of a lot of money.
Okay, so
for anything. But the way everybody was talking about it, I started feeling like there is something I don't know about the value of money. It seems to have changed for people. Like people were talking about it like, it's just 12.5 million rand. Ain't no thing. And I was like, okay.
Since we're talking about this, because I knew you would want to talk about Herman Mashaba, and we'll do this before we even start the burning platform, because
this
I have
is
some
not
thoughts.
A burning platform topic.
No, but I have some thoughts, right?
Okay.
And someone actually at the gym yesterday, this guy came up to me. He's a black lawyer. He's a black lawyer. Yeah, he was dressed. It wasn't in.
I'm just checking.
So he's a black lawyer. He says to me, "What do you think?" And I don't know him from a hole in the ground. This is the first question he says to me. Asks me is, "What do you think of Herman Mashaba and Prince Mashele and all of this?" So I said, because I hadn't really thought about it. I said, I think the worst person, the person who comes out of this the worst is Herman.
Really?
Yeah, because for Prince Mashele, who cares about his reputation? No one's sitting there thinking about him every day. He's not campaigning. He's not looking for your vote. You either read his stuff or you don't. I mean, it's obviously reputational damage, but the biggest reputational damage is for Herman Mashaba. Think about this. Now, I like Herman. Okay, I really do. I think he's trying to make a difference. I believe he sees himself as a real participant, but no one wants to write a book about him. No one cares. No one's sitting there going, what we really are missing on this shelf at Exclusive Books is a biography of Herman Mashaba. Said no one ever. And then he has to
He already has one out there.
He has to fork out, well, no one's read it. He has to fork out 12 million rand to get someone who has a bit of clout to write about him. Don't tell me that isn't embarrassing for Herman Mashaba. It is. This is really embarrassing for him. Am I wrong? Come on. And I say again, I like Herman Mashaba. He comes out of this.
That is embarrassing.
It's bad because what is politics? It's all about trying to be relevant, trying to make yourself the top of mind name, right? When people go politics in South Africa, who are the players? Who are the serious participants?
Yeah, like Stephen Saka was here and he spoke to John Steinberg, Fikile Mbalula, and Julius Malema.
Who did he not talk to?
I'm just
Herman Mashaba. So this is my point. And, we've had Musi Maimane in here. He suffers from the same problem, is that nobody's thinking about Herman and Musi. They kind of bring them in as an after. It's almost part of their diversity hire. They're like, no, seriously, because we use this word. No, and I'm not using it in a commercial sense, but in politics in this country, we go, well, we've got the three main guys. You've got the president of the ANC, you've got the leader of the opposition, and you've got this rabble-rousing guy who manages to make himself the center of attention at every party, right? Julius. Those are the three people. Everyone else is an also ran, and people include them because they feel bad for them. And they want to appear to be making a diversity hire. They want to show that they're looking at inclusivity. They're looking at a much wider spectrum. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying with this. And the fact that Herman had to fork out 12 million rand. Do you know what I could have done for Herman?
What could you have done?
I could have.
Herman's 12 million
I
rand?
promise you now, we'd have him at all the right places, saying all the right things.
I don't know.
Who's running his campaign?
All the right
Who
things.
do you think advised him to do this? Huh? Who? Who was it? Disaster. Absolute disaster.
It's a disaster all around. It is a disaster
all right.
round.
Very embarrassing, but I'm glad we got that off our chests.
But what do you think they did with it?
I'm waiting for the ebook, says Slippery Pickle. There's no way in hell I'm helping Herman recover that 12 bar. Well, no one's going to read that book.
He's never. It's in the landscape of publishing in South Africa. Nobody has ever made near
Nothing.
that kind of money.
Nothing. I
Not
can
even
promise you.
Nelson Mandela's Long Walk.
I had 2 best-selling books, okay? And I'm talking about in recent, because when Nelson Mandela was publishing A Long Walk to Freedom, he was the president of the country, and publishing was still alive and well. Everybody, almost like Miles' Little Red Book, everyone wanted to have a copy of Nelson Mandela's book. So that's in a different league. I had 2 of those books. We made money out of it. It was more work than it was worth. I'm proud of them. I'm glad we did them, but I will not do it again. There's no money in publishing.
No, there's no
so
money.
if Herman
That's
Mashaba thinks
why
he's
we
going to
do
make
it.
up the 12 mil, he's out of his mind. Finally, here's a little bit of coffee for Phumi. Let me show you this.
Okay.
I'm still figuring out these. There's Ryan bringing in. Are you wearing a sleeveless top?
That was shocking to me when I arrived this morning.
Jesus.
So today he is dressed completely like a Latweezy.
Don't you get cold?
Completely.
Yeah, you look like a Latweezy. Hang on, let me see if I can get you in there.
Can you just like turn to the side so people can see the side of your pants? I mean,
yeah, he's a Latweezy.
He's a Latweezy today. We've
Sorry,
got a
can't really
Latweezy
show that.
invasion at the studio.
Oh my God. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. All right. Well, we got a lot of cool stuff coming up this morning. We've actually got some very interesting guests popping by. We've got a guy called Jonny Steinberg, who's written the most incredible book about Nelson and Winnie and their marriage.
Yeah.
Obviously, the beginning,
And
the
all
middle,
the people
and
involved.
the end. Yes.
And
some
all the
famous
people involved in
Correct.
that marriage.
Absolutely.
He had a really fantastic spread. They gave him a really fantastic spread in the Sunday Times
Oh, good.
this past Sunday. I think that.
So you have some questions. Huh? Is that right? Well,
just a few.
So according to Stink Mina, it was a loan, and Prince said he's going to pay him back. Pay back the money. The only words in South Africa that never result in any action. Pay back the money.
I do think that the story might show us some smaller nyana skeletons.
You think so?
Yeah. I think the story is gonna reveal some smaller nyana skeletons.
Yeah.
And last night, it's ever evolving, the story. And last night, Prince Mashaba did release a statement, which was a true apology, unlike that shambles that was.
But don't you think
Americans.
his reputation's now down the toilet? I mean,
no, he's done.
He's finished, right?
He's done. This is a man who makes his living or talking about various political parties and hopefully extrapolating on what we see. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So telling us what's on the chessboard.
Kind of like what we do with the burning platform every week, but we don't make a living out of it.
And now his reputation, now forever, when he says anything, if it is anti anybody, if it is pro anybody, we're all going to be asking ourselves how much he got paid for that. Right.
And who's paying him? Maybe this is how a lot of politics works in this country.
Although in this whole story, guys, I cannot believe that Brutus Malada, who is the genesis of this entire scandal, has come out like nobody is even talking about why is this guy doing this? And he got paid 3 bar, hey? He got 3 out of that 12 million. And nobody is saying a damn thing about Brutus.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Are you getting the flu vaccine this year? Speaking of interesting questions, because after all the vax conversations of the last 4 years, I'm just staying the hell away.
From any vaccine.
Well, I mean, obviously when I was a kid, I had those.
No, I'm talking about.
I've never done the flu vaccine.
Really?
No. What the hell? What a waste of money. What a waste of time. I've never bothered. Total waste of time. In fact, I think I did do it once and it didn't help me at all. Didn't stop any flu.
I've been thinking about the flu vaccine because I've spent a week now with Kanego being quite unwell.
Oh, no?
Remember last week he was sick. I had to take him to my mom's house. He was still sick. I had to fetch him from school. Actually, he just got dropped off this morning to get ready. He was out of school yesterday. He's been sick.
Shame, man.
For like 2
That's
weeks.
shitty.
I haven't seen that since he was a toddler. Since how many years ago? 13 years ago.
13 was how we started
And
the show
so
this
I've been
morning.
thinking about the vaccine and wondering if people are taking this year's flu vaccine.
Well, I mean, I'm watching you with that cup of coffee, and it reminds me of why I order coffee and tea at work, right? I mean, we've got Jane here, and she's pretty good at that. Like, what do you want, coffee, tea? So I go, whatever, because it's more about warming your hands when it's cold like this than about drinking coffee or tea.
But it also warms up the inside.
Yes.
It does.
No, it does.
If it's a nice hot cup of coffee.
You got to do what you can do to stay warm, right? And I mean, we're still we haven't got heaters yet, so we're going to sort that out probably in the next 2 weeks. But we've really held out. Mash has been bringing his one in from home. Out of sheer desperation.
His own heater.
Mash.
Guy.
No,
what a legend.
This is what's happening. All right.
Unlike Ryan, who is walking around here,
no.
not even in a short sleeve, but in a no sleeve.
I'm just looking at the comments. So you guys have got it all wrong. People are talking about how he's from the East Rand. He's not. He's the West Rand, which is way more scary. Really? He's not from the East Rand at all. And someone here agreed exactly. So Lebang says, Ryan got excited about Prime, so he's definitely a Latweezy. That's about right, huh?
He is.
I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, so we got lots to do this morning, lots of people to see, places to go, things to talk about. Among other things, I mentioned we've got Jonny Steinberg popping in a little bit later on for the Burning Platform. Also, Kanthan will be in for the Burning Platform. Very, very exciting. So we got lots to talk about today, including an email about minimum wage that we got from one of our listeners. And Kanthan brought this up the other day, so we'll wait for him to be in to talk about it. Okay.
Mad.
A couple of stories in the news. Have you heard about the cholera outbreak in Hammanskraal?
Baba, this is where we are now. Third world diseases.
Exactly. So, all right. We're back to a stage of third world diseases actually being a reality for people who live in urban or semi-urban South Africa.
Third world disease.
It's a third world disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently this has got worse. So the latest we've got on this is that the source of the cholera outbreak is still not identified. So in other words, the latest I've got is that there isn't a latest.
Because who is going to tell us? Who do we trust to give us correct information about who is at fault here?
Don't know. I don't know. I mean, the mayor of Tshwane was out there trying to answer questions, but he's only been in the job for what?
2 months?
2 months. So the guy doesn't know what's going on yet. And this is something to do with the water treatment facility in a particular part of Tshwane, which has just been left to rack and ruin.
And a multi-million rand tender that was awarded to, we've heard this name before, Edwin Sodi.
Who's that again?
He is of the asbestos scandal in the Free State.
God. Really? So he moved to Tshwane, huh? So he moved to Tshwane to do some shit, do some shitty work.
So,
or should we say just take some money? Because that's what it is. Oh, man, I blame the health department, says Slippery Pickle, for the source of the outbreak. And then Congo Chris says this cholera is definitely caused by load shedding, fucking with the sewer pumps. The ANC will never self-report that they're responsible for the cholera deaths. But that is a good point, because everything is going to shit. A friend of mine said he couldn't go to gym yesterday in the East Rand because their gym is flooded with sewage. Yes.
If people in the East Rand can't go to
Yeah.
the gym, yeah.
Then we're in big trouble because who's going to protect us? So yeah, they've said that this cholera outbreak, they can't identify where it is, but of course the water treatment facility is called Rooival, and they're going to invest 450 million rand into that water treatment plant. That's what the mayor of Tshwane says at the moment, to try and get the water treated. I don't understand how things have got so bad. Are you telling me that for the last 8 years, people have just been going to work and what? Sitting on social media? Getting paid? Because clearly they weren't checking the equipment, maintaining the facility, doing the job that we are paying them to do, because these people work for us.
Listen.
Right?
It's
Jesus.
17 people dead so far.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And no one has been brought to task yet. No one will.
No one will.
It's like life estimeni. Are we still waiting for someone to be brought to book on life estimeni? And remember, we had those
and we don't need
commissions with Dikgang Moseneke.
And we don't even need to say someone. Like, start with Qetani. Start with Qetani
Mahlangu. Where's she now? What's she even up to now? Probably living the life.
Quietly spending all the money she stole.
Well, Lebang says Edwin Sodi is more interested in slay queens than actually doing any of the work for these tenders he keeps being given. Quite right. So why is he being given tenders? Is the question. And who is signing off on those? We've got, I mean, Phumi, you know how hard it is to be in business. You have to fill in 9,000 pages of paperwork for everything, right? So we can surely trace the source of the awarding of these tenders. We can find out who it is that says, give this one to Edwin Sodi. There's paperwork.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
There is a bid adjudication committee.
So then if we find out who that is, we must fire that person as well.
Those people.
You know,
firing people is not enough. We need to
send them to jail. And they need to pay back the money.
People need to be sent to jail. And we need to name and shame them. Because I think in our communities, we need to know. So if your brother-in-law works for the state and is driving a Range Rover and the family should be part of the
right. Especially if you know that guy can't add 3 and 8. Then you must know, right?
Yeah, these people should generally be shamed by everyone, including their families and their communities.
Couldn't agree more. Speaking of crooks and thieves and liars, a former top Steinhoff official and colleague of Marcus Jooste has told a German court they were aware of sham transactions. Really? Dirk Schreiber, who's the former managing director of Steinhoff Europe Group Services, told the Oldenburg Regional Court, again, now we have to rely on the Germans to get justice for us on the Steinhoff thing. Why are we not doing it?
They're not trying to get justice for us. They're getting their own justice.
Yeah, but this is the point.
Steinhoff
have we even
a German company.
Where is Marcus Jooste at the moment, and why have
living it up?
Where have South Africans last seen their money?
Living it up.
So this guy told the Oldenburg Regional Court that the bogus business deals should not have been accounted for in Steinhoff books. Court spokesperson Isabel Mullers told News 24 that Schreiber's statement to the court was brief. He's expected to give a more detailed explanation at the next hearing. Oh my God. This Marcus Jooste thing, it drives me up the wall. Can't tell you how irritated I am by it.
So he's living it up.
Yeah, he is. Clearly. Him, Aidane Mahlangu, everybody who's basically the lesson for the ordinary man in South Africa is steal as much as you can, be as crooked as you can, you'll get away with it. Right? That's the message. Nice. Do you care about Meta? Mark Zuckerberg's company?
I always care about Facebook.
So the other day we spoke about how the metaverse is just completely falling apart, right? And it's turned out to be a terrible waste of investor money. But they've just sold their animated engine Giphy, search engine Giphy. They've sold that to Shutterstock for $53 million, dollars, despite paying $400 million for it 3 years ago. Sounds like a great deal.
What?
So you buy it for $400 million, and you sell it for 53 million.
Sounds like money laundering.
Substantial loss. Giphy is the main supplier of animated GIFs to social networks such as Snapchat, TikTok, and Twitter. Meta platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp will still be able to access Giphy's contents as part of the deal. Every day, the world's largest collection of GIFs and stickers, that's Giphy, says they receive more than 1.3 billion search inquiries. They see various bits of their own content.
I'm in that.
Are you in it?
Those search inquiries.
Tell us.
I love it. I love GIFs. They're the most awesome reactions that you can. And it's always the matching of your thought or feeling to the perfect GIF, guys. It's
All
just
right.
it's a gift to humanity.
Well, it's time, Pums, for us to turn our attention to Dr. Mark, who is standing by. Here he is. Dr. Mark, how's it? How are you?
Morning, Gareth. I'm fine, and you?
Yeah, it's nice to see you. So, Dr. Mark, Phumi and I are standing by to be regaled with all kinds of interesting stories from you this morning. And we got lots to talk about. You've also had a couple of really interesting shows lately. Tell us what's going on in this week's show.
You know, with this week's show, we're going to look at delayed onset of puberty, and specifically puberty in boys. I've been getting a couple of patients bringing their children through the practice, and it's okay. These guys are now 15 and 16, short and smaller than their peers, and suddenly they think they have delayed onset of puberty. So, you know what, I think it's something that we should definitely be discussing.
All right. Well, I mean, you know, there are
50. How is 15 delayed?
15 is 15 about right? I mean, like,
You know
what is the right age? I'm way past this, so I haven't thought about this in 1,000 years. But you know, Pumi's got a son who's around about that age. So, what should be the age? Should a parent worry if their kid hasn't hit puberty at like 17?
If they haven't hit puberty at 17, there's a big problem.
You should worry.
Right. Okay.
So puberty usually starts in boys around the age of 10, 11. But there's signs of it happening. And I think this is something that we need to understand. We have a couple of stages of puberty. They're called the Tanner stages. Now, I'm not going to go into them in detail. But if you want to know more, you can listen a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But puberty starts with enlargement of the testicles first. And then we get a little bit of development of space, hairs around the penis, maybe under the arm. And then the penis starts enlarging. And then we start progressing to the place where the voice starts changing. We get a little bit taller. And there's a bit of muscle growth. Now, that happens over a period of time. And what we need to remember is that this is different for every boy. Factors that play a role there in the onset of puberty is whether your father or your mother or both were also late bloomers. So if you didn't go into puberty or start puberty with your friends at the same time, you know what, you're more likely that your kids would also be a little bit later.
But I have a question about the food we eat, and we've spoken before with you, Dr. Mark, about all of the various things we put into our bodies. Could all the hormones that is in all of the stuff we eat, the chicken, play a role in some of what parents are seeing as delayed onset of puberty, or even an early onset of puberty?
I think that's a very valid question to ask. If we think about what sets puberty on the go, it's a hormonal cascade that happens from the brain to your pituitary gland, and then from the pituitary gland to your testicles and ovaries. Now, The biggest hormones that are involved there are the gonadotropins, and it says exactly what they are. Gonads refer to the testicles and the ovaries, and tropins mean that they are stimulating. And then they work on the pituitary gland and they release a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. Now, this is what's responsible for sperm production and ovulation in girls. Now, it goes hand in hand with luteinizing hormone, which is responsible for the formation of testosterone. So if anything in your hormonal cascade that starts in the brain goes wrong somewhere along the line, your testicles either do not get the message to develop, or they are unable from a physical perspective to develop. So the brain doesn't send the message, the testicles doesn't get the message, or they're not able to develop. And we can delay or enhance this through diet and hormonal diets or hormonal exposure. So if we look at celiac disease, for instance, which is a malabsorption disease, this is where you have a very bad gluten intolerance. It's associated with a delayed onset of puberty for the simple reason these kids cannot absorb enough nutrients. So children who are underfed, and I think we are seeing this more and more in our rural areas, children that have constitutional growth delay, where there's not enough food for them to feed the body and fuel the body so that they do not grow, go into puberty later. Now, most guys, and these are the predominant ones that I'm seeing in my practice, they're rugby players and they were good in primary school, and now their friends are going into puberty and they're not catching up to their friends, and now suddenly they're in delayed puberty, but they have a full bush of pubic hair. So that is a growth delay.
Full bush is a sure. Full bush is a surefire way to know, right, Doc? I mean,
but they do catch up, but they just catch up a little bit later. So they're the same height as everyone else after puberty or in adult life. So, there's investigations that you need to do. I think the most pertinent thing that we have to take out of this is be aware there is something like delayed onset or early onset, which is also called precocious puberty. Now, I find most kids precocious nowadays.
Precocious puberty.
Most, in the hood.
We can do some tests, and it's a simple blood test, and it's fairly easy to treat.
So in the hood, when I was growing up, one of the surefire ways of knowing it, and they used to call it atolitoli. It's like adolescence, like when you're Sally, when you're that teenager and all of the teenageness. Is any of that stuff, like the mood swings, the bad attitude, are any of those things, Dr. Mark, one of the ways that you can then decide if puberty is like on its way? It's here or it's on its way. You may not be as tall or your voice lowered or any of those things. But rather, attitude is also part of or not?
Absolutely. You know it. You can spot a teenager from a distance. Now, I don't have children, but I do know that it's far easier to raise boys than it is to raise girls, because boys just want to be left alone in a room. They entertain themselves.
Also, what are they what are they doing in their room all by themselves?
Do you really want to know?
I do. Is that why the room smells so bad?
Oh my God.
It depends on how much asparagus they're eating.
Oh, that's appalling. Good Lord.
Sorry, she asked.
Ugh. This topic is sinking us down into all kinds of layers of hell.
This topic, Dr.
All right,
Mark.
so What do you say about the variety of puberty blockers that are suddenly all the rage, especially in America with all this transgender stuff and what they call gender affirming care? Do we have such things in South Africa? Has it become a thing here? Is it something parents need to worry about? And what do these puberty blockers do?
Well, again, Gareth, it's a simple thing. They're going to change the hormonal signaling to your gonads, either the testicles or the ovaria, and that happens in the brain, either that you sever the hypothalamus pituitary axis or the pituitary gonadal axis, and that can be suppressed. So a lot of your psychiatric medication can suppress that stimulation, and that's a problem. Now, I don't think it's something that we use in South Africa as a routine. And in my honest opinion, if we look at childhood development, your prefrontal cortex, where you actually develop a part of the brain which is able to react and respond to primitive emotions, that's only fully developed after the age of 25.
So you shouldn't really mess with this stuff before then. I mean,
I wouldn't. One of the things that we are finding is with kids that embark on gender reassignment therapy. Yeah. They start down this road, and 6 or 7 years later, which is only about halfway through, they realize, oh, but I actually am what I was born. Or
they have they call them detransitioners, and these people are filled with regret about things that they did when they were young and impressionable, and sometimes the doctors and the parents feel social pressure because it's a social contagion to allow these people to transition, and then later on in life they have serious problems. Of course, if you mess with that stuff, I mean, you can tell us more than I can, Doc, but if you mess with that stuff at an early age, you're going to have a very unsatisfactory sex life later on, no matter what.
It's not just an unsatisfactory sex life. We look, for instance, at the risk of cardiovascular disease, et cetera, in men that transition to women, and we see that their cardiovascular risk profile increases. Why? Because of a lack of estrogen, or the other way around, it's exactly the same. Women at a young age that transition to male, we suppress their estrogen levels.
Right.
And then estrogen that declines, your risk for cardiovascular disease now suddenly becomes 1 in 9 instead of 1 in 20.
Wow.
So for your older guys, and here we're looking at your Jenners and whatever, so when they transition from
any of the, let's just be clear, any of the Jenners here. We're not talking about just Caitlyn Jenner.
Just pick the one.
No, but in any case, I think this just points to the power of social media and marketing. But if it wasn't for that man or woman, I don't really know. I still don't understand.
You can say person. You can say
good.
Person.
No, I'll say man. I like that. I'm with you, Doc.
If it wasn't for him and this being so much publicized, I don't think that we would be dealing with this amount of stuff. It's strange.
My question then is, as a parent to a person in their teens, because we're talking about boys specifically, what then are the 3 things that you should be looking at that should create a worry in your mind that says, this is late and I need to do something about it? What are the top 3?
No.
things?
Okay, so the top 3 would be, and I think this might be a little bit uncomfortable for mums, maybe not for dads, is development of the genitals. The genitals should enlarge. And it starts with the testicles.
You can't just,
out.
Doc, you can't just walk into the room and say, right, let's have an examination right now. Yeah, I mean, for heaven's sake.
That's why I say this might be a little bit uncomfortable. That's called
a little bit. This could scar the kid for life. What are you talking about?
It could also scar the mum.
Yeah, of course it could.
So development of the testicles, development of hair, pubic hair, and facial hair can be way delayed. So pubic hair and hair under the arms, this is not a very accurate sign. And then I think one of the easy ones is when they just don't grow, when they don't have their growth spurt at the age of 12. Boys have a growth spurt between the age of 11 and 12 of about 5 centimeters. The next year, they should have a growth spurt of a little bit more. And the last growth spurt is here between the ages of 16 and 17, which can be up to about 8-9 centimeters. So if they don't hit that growth spurt, you know what, you are looking at constitutional delay, growth delay.
All right, let me ask something controversial here, because there are a lot of kids who feel that they need to compete in sport and physical activity, and they get onto steroids and all kinds of other things that can mess with their growth, particularly of muscle, but of everything else too. We know bone and the glands and everything else comes into this. How have you observed changes in South Africa over the last couple of years with this competitive need to be the biggest, which is a big thing, especially in some of the high schools in South Africa? What do you have to say about that, Doc?
So, you know what, the first thing is those guys present to me in their 20s, and here I mean early 20s. With
so by then it's already been in progress for some time.
Yeah. So they present with erectile dysfunction and emotional disturbances. For the simple reason, they've literally fried the transformers, which sits in the brain.
Oh my God, imagine that.
And you can't get them back on. You know what, we know that if we hit by a solar storm, we will be plunged into the dark ages. And this is exactly what those kids do. The solar storm of hormones, they fry the system completely. Erectile dysfunction, small penises. So for the boys, if you want a nice big penis one day, when you can actually use it properly, you don't
nice big penis.
Steroids. It's
a nice big penis.
Growth.
You want to actually be able to get hard. Don't take the steroids. I mean, that's the most obvious marketing message I've ever heard in my life.
Absolutely. And these guys tend to be short because if you start with hormonal treatment, high doses at an early age, you close the growth plates. So these guys are short and squat. So they literally look, they've been squished.
And what do they come to you because they're just desperate? They can't they can't perform. They can't perform in the bedroom. Really?
Doesn't work for them. There's no sexual desire, etc., etc. You know, in your 20s and in your early 30s, you should be humping trees. All that they can hump is an imaginary blow-up doll.
Don't pull that face, Phumi. It's true.
Bona, all I'm saying is 7 a.m. People must just listen to your show a little bit later this morning. Right now,
people have got to know.
I'm still drinking my coffee and it's hectic.
We need people, Phumi. We need people to know this stuff early in the morning. Get your day right. Get off the steroids. There we go. Thank you, Doc. I appreciate this. I like your candor and your honesty this morning. That is Dr. Mark. Do not miss his show today. Just a little bit later this morning. Thanks, Doc. Nice to see you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right. Cheers. There he is. Dr. Mark, Phumi. Traumatized you.
Bona. I was never ready.
All right. We'll be back in a moment or two. Stick around. cliffcentral.com. It is Thursday.
Is hormone replacement therapy safe? And the answer is a resounding yes. It does not cause cancer. Okay. But if you have an underlying cancer that's already active, it will and has the possibility of lighting that little ember into a raging fire. So it's very important to understand the patient's medical history, current medical condition, family history, before embarking on this road.
That was the T Health Show, empowering you with knowledge. Download all previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform. The T Health Show is brought to you by T Clinic.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
Will electric cars cause the next oil crisis? At least 20 years.
At least 20 years.
Before it's an immediate sort of issue.
Yes. So now you got to ask yourself, well, because we're definitely not going to have a scenario where suddenly overnight there's no more oil consumption. There's going to be oil consumption for the next 3 decades, at least. So after 2035, that is, because at the moment we're still producing ICE vehicles. That's if everybody complies. Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
All right, it is time for the burning platform this morning. As it is every Thursday, we check in on all the big stories in the news. We check in on current affairs. We talk about the people, the places, the things, the economy, the society, the politics. And Phumi Mashaba is here with me this morning. Look at Phumi Mashaba, empty chair. No, here's Phumi Mashaba. There she is. There she is. We're still trying to figure out these cameras, and Kanthan is meant to be in that empty chair.
That empty chair.
Oh, there he is.
Aha.
Okay. All right. Let me show you this. I can do this properly. There's your chair. You can go and sit in it. I'll introduce you to our guest in just a moment. Kanthan has appeared all in black, as is per usual.
Now,
very good.
Now, right next to me, I can punch you.
Yeah, exactly. They can lash out at each other. Yeah. All right. So we got lots to talk about this morning, and there's always plenty to talk about. There's never a dull week in South Africa. We're back to cholera, the age of cholera. I mean, it's just so embarrassing and upsetting, but we'll talk about that in a moment or two. We've also got an author here who I'm very excited to have on the show, and somebody whose work is well known to many South Africans, certainly literate ones. Jonny Steinberg is the author of several books about everyday life in the wake of South Africa's transition to democracy. He's a 2-time winner of the Sunday Times Alan Paton Award. And Phumi, you said there was a nice spread in the Sunday Times this week on the new book. An inaugural winner of the Donald Wyndham Sandy M. Campbell Literature Prizes. Also, until 2020, was Professor of African Studies at Oxford University, no less. He currently teaches part-time at the Council on African Studies at Yale. Isn't that incredible? At the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies, and is a visiting professor at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research in Johannesburg. The reason we've got him here is because he's written an amazing book called Winnie and Nelson, and it is all about the marriage of Nelson and Winnie Madikizela Mandela. And obviously, there are plenty of things to unpack there, so we won't waste any time. Jonny, it's very, very nice to have you here. Thank you for coming. Good to see you. Yeah. So first things first, congratulations on the book. I mean, it must have been a hell of a project.
It was a very exciting project. It was 3.5 to 4 years of full-time work, and I loved every moment of it. It was a journey of discovery.
So, I mean, COVID helped, right, in terms of time and research?
COVID helped. I was locked away with nothing else to do, day in and day out.
Oh my God. All right. And in terms of this is a monster mammoth project to undertake, because there are so many chapters and there's so many aspects to this relationship. And in so many ways, I think it made South Africa an even more interesting place. I mean, on their own, Nelson and Winnie are quite something, but to look at them as part of a collective, to actually observe them from their early romance into their political union, into their separation, the fact that they were so, distant from each other and so incapable of being around each other all the time. And then there was the little bit of time that they had with each other. And then, of course, post-freedom. What's going on there, Canton? What are you doing? You are being such a disruptor this morning.
So disruptive. Like WhatsApp coming in and out.
Phumi keeps poking me from the
Phumi.
side.
Who the hell is Dumi?
Dumi.
And he brought an imaginary
Ryan,
friend.
get in here and just turn this thing of Canton's off.
Please.
Jesus, I don't know why I'm having to hear everything in echo. I'm trying to introduce our guest and we're messing
Help
around.
Canton, please.
Just turn his sound off there. Thank you. Oh my God. Is that all it took? One tap from Ryan. So Jonny, as I was saying,
that's why he gets the big bucks.
So the marriage is one aspect to this, but then there's this divorce at the end, and a very bitter and acrimonious one at that, and very public. And of course, all of Winnie's shenanigans, both pre and post divorce, which are worth discussing too. There's an absolute smorgasbord of material here.
But to go back what you were saying at the beginning, a book about a marriage and a country.
Mm-hmm.
They really, the two protagonists, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, lead me there, because they very self-consciously wanted their marriage to embody a struggle for freedom. They wanted the whole country's story to be told through their marriage. From the earliest days, they were beautiful. They liked cameras. They were ambitious. They understood that their marriage was a political asset, and that you could tell a freedom struggle through the relationship between them. And really, they were right. I mean, that marriage in the 1980s was probably the most famous marriage in the world, and it was inseparable from South Africa's struggle for freedom. And it was such a simple story. It's that this wonderful couple has been torn asunder. One of them is in prison, the other is banished. And the day they get back together is the day their people are free. And so the story of a marriage and the story of a people become one. Sure. They put it out there like that, and they succeeded. But with a twist in the tail, they lost control over the story. They lost control over the story of what their marriage was and what their country was. And to write a book about them, that's a gift, because you can... a writer's always looking for a frame, for something that contained a big story. And that marriage really does contain a big story. It's about two huge, larger-than-life people, but it's about a country over the course of a century. And that marriage allows you to take in that expanse of that bigger story.
What do you mean they lost control of the story?
Well, one of the things that happened is that while Nelson Mandela was in prison, he and Winnie grew politically estranged, but in a very strange way, because Nelson didn't know for a long time. When you're locked up in jail, you lose touch with many things, including what's happening in your wife's head and your wife's life. But by the 1980s... And
in her bed.
Well, that's another story we can get to.
I mean,
we have to. That's the part of the salacious gossip I'm here for.
We will definitely get there.
I'm only here for the salacious gossip.
But before we get there, by the 1980s, Nelson Mandela's greatest fear was that his country would descend into civil war, because he felt that if there was war, South Africa would never recover from it. And he felt that his responsibility as a political leader was to ensure that there was going to be a negotiated settlement. Winnie Mandela by then felt the exact opposite. She felt that unless apartheid ended through a violent mass insurrection, it would not end at all. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that behind his back, while going to see him in prison and playing the loyal wife, she is actually attempting an armed insurrection. And he realizes this very late in the day. He realizes late in the day that his worst fear, his worst nightmare is in his marriage. And so this marriage becomes much more interesting, much more dangerous, much more complicated than either of them imagined at the beginning.
What a fascinating way to start this discussion, because there's so many different places it can go. The fact that they're also such different personalities, I think is fascinating. You also said that it wouldn't be the first, I mean, I'm surmising, it wouldn't be the first political union. There have been throughout history powerful people who have come together, men and women who've decided to put their political ambitions ahead of their own romantic ones. And there seems to be a lot of naivety around the fact that Winnie and Nelson were this loving couple. And they seem to also, people are doing revisionist history on this and saying, oh, well, it was this beautiful story. But then, of course, all the difficulties of being in South Africa and during the struggle and all of that stuff, that was the real problem. That was what made their marriage fall apart. But actually, as you say, it was from within.
Well, I mean, the story of their courtship is amazing, really. She was, she was young. She was 20 years old. He was 38 years old. He was nearly twice her age. He was a very famous lawyer, a very famous political activist, a very glamorous man. He wore bespoke suits. He drove a fancy car. He was very flashy. He was married with 3 children, but was a notorious womanizer. I mean, Johannesburg discussed his sex life endlessly. He was driving past Baragwanath Hospital, where he saw this stunningly beautiful girl waiting for a bus, and said that he was so taken that he wanted to turn his car around and go back. But instead what he did is found out who she was and get her phone number. And so begins their story. And her side of the story is she was an extraordinary young woman. I mean, besides being stunningly beautiful, she was a woman in the 1950s who knew from a young age that she wanted to be a public figure and a political figure and to exercise power. And how do you do that as a woman in the 1950s? You've got to take the resources you have. And a resource she had was her beauty and her charisma and her sexuality, and she used that. And so while she was engaged to Nelson Mandela, she was engaged to another man called Barney Sampson. She promised both of those she was going to marry them. And she played them off each other, but in a way that
Cleopatra and Antony and I mean, that's what it is. It's Julius Caesar and it's this incredible woman who realized her gifts and deployed them,
but took herself to the edge of distraction. The edge of unacceptability. So one of the things that she did is, so she stayed in this very austere Methodist hostel where you weren't allowed male visitors. So she would see Nelson in his office in Chancellor House, his law office, in the evenings. But when he would go out to the boxing gym, which he did every evening, leaving her there, she would immediately see her other lover in his office. She was really scandalous. And Nelson Mandela.
So right from the start, there's no loyalty here.
Well, that's not the way I see it. The way I see it is that they're both
pursuing their own agendas.
They're very exuberant, exciting people. And Nelson Mandela is absolutely in love with this audacity. He thinks it's extraordinary. And it is. He's throughout the 1950s, he goes for powerful women. And Winnie is the most powerful he's met. So they are very in love. What's happening between them is very electric. They are deeply attracted to each other. But attraction's a complicated thing, and I think part of the attraction is that they understand what they're going to look like together in public. They're both very, very ambitious people. They understand that their marriage is going to be a thing, and it can be a political thing. They know that from the start.
Sure. I mean, what an intro. Listen, you read the book and the hair on the back of your neck stands up. It's absolutely astonishing. You've got something to say.
Well, I do also want to ask about your source material and research and how you went about that to getting to the story that you eventually tell.
So it's a long story over a long period of time. So there are different sources at different points. But let me just talk about two for now. So that story of their courtship and how dangerous it was, how on the edge of unacceptable it was. The only
Dangerous liaisons. Told you I'm here for the salacious.
The only reason we know that story is that Nelson Mandela was locked up in jail years later and wrote to his wife about it. They would never have spoken about it openly if he hadn't been in jail. And the reason why he spoke so honestly about it was because here he was locked up when he was on the outside. He didn't know what was going on with her. He was so afraid of losing her. And the only way he had of keeping her was through his letters to remind her how exciting things had been. You know, they were together such a short time. They met in 1957. They married in 58. By 1961, he was underground. So there are these 4 short years, and for him, his life is embodied in those 4 years, and he's trying to preserve them in prison and trying to take her along for the ride, to get her to remember what it was like. And so he tells her, he reminds her in these letters of these unacceptable things that happened between them, just to keep her excitement up, to maintain the love between them.
Can I just ask you quickly, was it always the plan to wait until they were both gone? Because you couldn't write this kind of thing while they were alive. And were there any people who didn't want to talk to you about this?
Yeah, this book's impossible to write while they're alive. You know, when I began writing this book, the idea was to write a book on Nelson Mandela rather than his marriage. And the reason was that now that he was dead, I felt that it was possible for the first time to write about him as a rounded human being with his frailties, with the dark side, with everything. That if you'd done it while he was alive, it would have been an attack on him,
sure,
and maybe even an attack on the South African project.
And I think people would have been upset about any portrayal of Winnie that wasn't saintly. At some point, just before she died, people were treating her with kid gloves in certain quarters.
Well, there was these two opposites. Either people treated her with kid gloves, or they demonized her. You know, she was either a goddess or the devil. And I think that both of those don't get her story. That it's much more
they're both
complicated.
it's a very binary way of looking at a very complex woman.
Yeah,
and you know, and there is also some talk in your book about the forces that were anti-Winnie, at least in her mind, and to a large extent, even within the organization, who saw the rise of her political kind of power, as it were, and tried to thwart it along the way. And some of those people, including a former president, cannot possibly be happy that you've written this story in this way.
Well, it's interesting that you raised that. So I think it's important to tell that story from the beginning, because it really gives an insight into what an incredibly complicated person Winnie was. So in the early 1960s, Nelson Mandela went underground. He was caught. He was put on trial. There was the famous Rivonia trial. While that was happening, you know, being a really patriarchal man, he thought, I'm gone. I need to find a man to look after my wife and children. And so he approaches a distant relative of his, a man called Brian Samana, and instructs him to look after his wife and children. And within a short time, Brian Samana and Winnie are lovers. And Winnie invites Brian Samana, asks him to leave his own wife and children and move into the house that she shared with Nelson Mandela, which scandalizes the movement. They can't believe that she's doing this, but it goes on. And then it turns out that Brian Samana is in fact a police informer. And 2 men go to jail as a result of him. Fikile Bam arrives on Robben Island screaming at Nelson Mandela, saying, look at what your wife has done to me. And at that point, a delegation goes to her and says, you have to leave this man. We are telling you to leave this man. And she says, nobody tells me what to do. I'm staying with him. She was a very complicated person. She had no sense of self-preservation. That episode nearly destroyed her. It shaped her life in the 1960s. It made her isolated. It indirectly...
Do you think she was a bad judge of character?
I think that what happened with her is, to go back to her childhood, she was one of 11 children. She was in a massively ambitious family. What her family had done over the last 2 generations was extraordinary. They wanted the next generation to go even further. She had parents who picked winners and losers. And she understood that if she was a loser, she would evaporate. She'd be nothing. She had to be a winner. It was a very, very tough world to grow up in.
Sure.
And she also understood from a young age that to be a winner, she had to be inside her father's head and determine what was happening there. She needed to occupy space in somebody else's mental world. And she did with her father. She became his prodigal son. He invested more in her than his sons. And it's something that he'd never imagined that he would do. So she had this, just from a very tough childhood, she developed this power. But the downside of that power, the flip side of it, is that she could never be alone, not physically, but also not mentally and emotionally. She had to be in a boundaryless relation with another, as she was with her father when she was young. And so if you look at her political career, she is always moving into politics in a consuming sexual relationship with somebody else, always, at every moment in her long career. And Brian Semana is the first of many. They were literally inseparable for a few years.
Wow.
And so when she was told, leave this man, she couldn't. She was bound to him. She moved through the world with that sort of intensity.
You're looking very enthralled by this story, but I mean, a lot of it you know already.
Yeah, but it's fascinating actually listening to it from your perspective and the very human insights that you're giving. My perspective on Winnie has always been very blatantly antagonistic towards her, Gareth. And
Yeah,
as you know from the very harsh things I had to say about her on Twitter, and her Ben 10, as in Dali Mpofu. And the very personal point of antagonism for me was the murder of Dr. Abu Aswat, who was a great friend of mine. And it's very clear to just about everyone that Winnie's role in terms of his murder was absolutely pivotal. And, so this idea of complexity at the same time being someone who actually conspires to assassinate someone who is in fact being close to you and close to the movement. How do you actually reconcile that stuff?
So I completely understand your deep anger, given where you come from. My position is different. I'm taking in the whole of an 80-year life, and for me as a writer of that life and of a marriage in it, to reduce the whole life to what happened in the late 1980s is wrong. There's so much else there, and there is an extraordinary woman there. But
just give us a sense of where that comes from in terms of the overall story arc that we're talking about.
Well,
I think he's being very calm.
Give him a chance.
Go on.
Phumi, stop interrupting me.
So I don't sugarcoat what happened in the late 1980s. I tell the story, and it's a horrific story. The murder you're talking about is one of several. But what I try to do is shed some light on what was going on in that household, on why it became such a crazy household. And it's a long and complicated story, and it's probably better told in the book. But one of the things that was so, Winnie and her football team, lived in this house in Orlando West, and it was a very unruly space and an undisciplined space. And within a short period of time, people in that household had committed several murders. And the result is that Winnie was never investigated, never touched, never questioned by the police, but members of her household were. They were taken into detention, and many became informers. And by 1987, nobody in that household knew who anyone else in that household was or who they were working for. It was part of its chaos, and it kind of develops its own psychology as a collective organism, and a crazy, dark, difficult psychology.
There's been so much paranoia and suspicion.
And at various points, it needed to find an external enemy in order to draw attention away from itself. And that's kind of what happened in the famous incident where four young men, well, 3 young men and a child, were kidnapped from a Methodist manse down the road. It was this household, for its very survival, turning its attention on another household, finding evil there in order to distract attention from its own darkness, its own. It was really collapsing in a state of paranoia at that time.
Jeez,
so
what a story.
You were also talking earlier about how this book is also a study on the South African landscape and a project, as it were. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so many things to say, but let me just focus on one. I mean, a really sad aspect of Nelson Mandela's story is, by the 1980s, he was quite a remorseful man. He didn't like the life that he'd lived in the 1950s. He saw his children's lives and he didn't like what he saw. A lot of them were going wrong. A lot of them were ruined. He believed that it was his fault because he hadn't looked after them properly in the 1950s. And attached to the sadness about his family and the desperate attempt to do something to put it right was a sadness about his country. He was terrified of civil war. He was absolutely convinced that if South Africa descended into war, it would never come out again. It would just take generations to recover. And he wanted to avoid that more than anything else. And yet he was in jail and isolated and increasingly out of touch. And I think that what he didn't know is that what he feared most was already happening. And to an extent, it already happened. The insurrections of the 1980s was a dreadful, dreadful time. I don't think South Africa has quite come to terms with it. And a great irony is that insurrection had eaten its way into the heart of his family, and he didn't know. What was happening in his house in Soweto. The extent to which violent death visited his house in Soweto. The extent to which it was a center and an emblem of the extent to which things were falling apart. He didn't know that until. He didn't ever know that, really. I don't think he could ever admit to himself exactly what had happened. And so, this couple begins beautiful and young and attractive and very ambitiously want to embody a nation's story and their story. And it does, but in such an uncomfortable way.
Can we just fast forward quickly? A lot of people are saying, this is a burning platform and we talk normally about current affairs and politics, but really this is an opportunity for us to just dig deep into such a pivotal relationship in South Africa's political past. And I can't help thinking that for most people, all of this is ancient history up to the moment where he's released. And then their relationship has to resume in some way. And this is the part that I think is most interesting, because we all remember headlines, we remember the pictures, we remember the overall story of South Africa post-94, obviously, when he was president. But Winnie's story kind of goes underground a little bit there, like his went underground in the 60s. And it only emerges again once he's gone, where she appears as the loyal wife again, not the primary wife, but the next wife at the funeral. And for many people, the abiding memory of Winnie is this older lady who is mostly quiet and mostly doesn't say very much. And I mean, come on, towards the end, she didn't.
No, but
it was better for her that she didn't say much.
I don't know if her story goes underground, because there are many moments in the years, even as they were estranged and then divorced, that she keeps popping up, right? I think about her very famous slapping incident with Thabo Mbeki, and all of those moments where Winnie never quite disappeared into the ex-wife of this amazing person.
How do you characterize
I think towards the end of her life, her star rises again among young people. And it does because she retells the story of her marriage. She's continually retelling the story of her marriage. She's so good at it. And the last story she tells before she dies, in the last sort of 6 or 7 years of her life, she says Nelson Mandela was locked away from the experience of being a Black South African. I mean, she puts it as bluntly as that. She says, they treated my husband like with cotton wool. He didn't know what we were going through. And by the time he was released from prison, he wasn't the same Nelson Mandela. He was no longer the embodiment or the representative of his people. Whereas I was in the cauldrons. I was facing the fire. I am the embodiment of Black experience in the late 20th century. I experienced it all. And if I had been in charge in the early 1990s, we wouldn't have compromised. We would have fought on. And so she takes this marriage, she takes their dual experiences, and she turns it into a potent and volatile political story. And for a young generation now who were not born when apartheid ended, who were not born when this couple separated, but who are very disillusioned with the current order, it's a very powerful story. And that's why she is now an iconic figure, in the populist left. She was a genius storyteller. Her antennae were so fine. She knew what was going on around her and how to place herself in what was going on around her.
Well, I mean, Tula says in the comments here that we love Winnie. We're celebrating her holistically with her flaws, her losses, and her winnings. She became what she was because of oppression, and she came out a winner. Pablo says Winnie was the backbone of the ANC. Stop profiting off bullshit now that they're gone. I mean, these are the...
There's another, Winnie was a disgusting terrorist.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
So the polar views persist.
I mean, you would have wanted, you would have had people who wanted a hagiography here more than a...
I mean, the point of the book was to slip into neither of those polar views. It really would have ruined the book. She's too complicated to tell a simple story about.
So tell me about where it all started falling apart in their relationship, because that to me is the crucial bit that we miss, because Nelson was so busy. He was becoming president. He was already president at a certain point. And then he just turned off the taps and completely disengaged from her. What happened there?
I think things started falling apart slowly and invisibly while he was in prison, because you can't maintain a relationship for 27 years when you can't see one another. It's just not possible. So it's sad. What was happening in his mind was he understood that his life had been broken by prison. And it's hard to get your head around because he's becoming famous, he's becoming politically powerful, but he understands at every moment that isn't a substitute for a human life. And he's trying to gather who he was before he went to jail, because that's all he had. And what he had was Winnie and their kids. And in his mind, and you can see through his letters, his sense of her is becoming more and more idealized. It's no longer a human being in his mind, it's a fantasy. And you can see it's a fantasy in quite disturbing ways, because in the same letter, he'll start a letter describing her as this 20-year-old beauty that he met. And by the end of the letter, suddenly she's a 55-year-old woman and thinking of old age. Time is scrambled in his head. So he's more and more in love with her. She's more and more the center of his identity, but he's actually lost touch with who she is. And she can see this. She's on the outside living a life. She's developed her own political identity. She has had several lovers. She has lived an adult life. And she sees what's going on with him, that he actually no longer knows who she is. She understands pretty early on how hollowed out the marriage has become. But then he's released from prison, and what they both want from the marriage is just completely polar opposites. She no longer has any respect for his politics. She has contempt for his politics by now. She really does. She's certainly not attracted to him anymore. He's frozen in time. He's an old gentleman from the 1950s. She doesn't like that very much, but the marriage to him is her greatest political asset, and she wants to keep it. Whereas for him, he believes that they both have an obligation to try and resume the relationship they had 27 years earlier. And that's what he expects from her, and she will absolutely not give that to him. She has another lover, and she doesn't hide it. And she ends up humiliating him.
Cuckolding him.
Some very difficult stuff happens in the early 90s. He's newly a very powerful man. His own psychological foundations by now are pretty fragile, and he begins to use his political power to try and put his marriage back together in ways that are quite uncomfortable. And so, for instance, at her kidnapping trial, a couple of her co-defendants and witness disappear, the night before the trial has begun. He didn't order that personally, but people around him did. He did other stuff. He squeezed money from international organizations to fund her trial. When the Orlando West branch of the ANC did not even vote her onto the executive because of the Stompie affair, he summoned the leadership to create a new branch for her.
Wow.
And so she could become its chairman. So it's a very difficult moment where he is, he is Nelson Mandela, he's famous, but he's also been a prisoner for 27 years and is trying to find his feet, trying to find out what his life is about. And there's just this moment where he confuses the personal and the political. He uses this political power to try and mend his personal life. And it's never going to work. His marriage is over, really.
Wait,
I thought you were
about to say something.
I wanted to find out whether you touched on Mandela's testimony at his divorce trial. and whether you use that in the book.
You know,
very interesting thing at the time was it was the first time that mainstream media in South Africa collectively broke the law and published his testimony at his trial. I disagreed with that at the time. I thought that the strictures of the Divorce Act, which say that you shouldn't be publicizing stuff that goes on in divorce court, but he said powerful stuff there. And did you touch on that? And
I decided to end the main narrative of the book when they separated in 1992, and the reason was the book was long, and I felt that is really the moment that the marriage ended, and the book is about the marriage. So the nuts and bolts day-to-day narrative ends in 1992, and then there's an epilogue which sort of races through the next 20 years, where I had a couple of things to say. So I think it was a difficult decision not to go into the 96 divorce, but I think it would have ruined the rhythm of the book. I think that it said what it needed to say.
Oh, maybe it's for a sequel.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of appetite for that. Well, Jonny, I really appreciate you coming in to see us this morning, and I wish you well with the book. I'm sure it's going to be a runaway success. This is still one of those relationships, and people love a story with all the different little touch points in it. You've got rich material here. You've got amazingly interesting people, complex people, and you've done a tremendous job of researching the hell out of this too. So thank you for informing all of us. I mean, we're just thrilled to have had the chance to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. It's been very good to be here.
What a pleasure. Jonny Steinberg, everybody, and the book is called Nelson and Winnie. You can obviously find it at good bookstores. Winnie and Nelson. Let me just get that right. And you can hear all about all good bookstores, and even the bad ones,
and online,
right? Exactly. All right, very, very good. Thank you very much, Jonny. And we've got the burning platform still to talk about. I want to quickly refer to a letter which came out as a result of a discussion we had about the minimum wage the other day. I'm sure you saw it as well. Someone called Quibus sent us a letter, Canthan, and that's why I reference you here. Quibus said that he's very annoyed about the fact that this minimum wage thing isn't a bigger issue in South Africa. He himself has been hampered by lots and lots of things, including all kinds of onerous BEE legislation. And I suppose he's just agreeing with you, but he wanted to know what your comments were on his own story.
Just remind me of his own story, Gareth.
All right, I'll read you the email.
Right,
let me read you the email.
Before you read the email, Jonny, please do stay with us, because the burning platform is also about all of our own views, as well as what we know about the world. So we'd love to have your voice here too.
Great. Thanks.
All right. So here's part of it. He says, with regard to the conversation about minimum wage, I completely agree with Canthan. Minimum wage is one of the things that we use. Bargaining councils, also just another way of minimum wage for a certain sector. See attached for electricians, and then he goes into some detail there. It's a very, very silly system. We as small businesses have to continuously work our way around these rules. With triple BEE, first I had to make sure that I didn't go over the turnover threshold, managing our turnover to stay compliant. Now we have to manage a staff complement and stay under 50. I could have grown my business much larger if it wasn't for this. Once you go over the threshold, you are basically stuffed, as you have to increase with just such a number to be where you are, and then keep things under the threshold. If they take triple BEE away, the unemployment will increase to 35%, as most surely the BEE industry creates a substantial amount of work in our growing economy, or not growing at this point. If you open up Pick and Pay across from a spa, you cannot create wealth. You only share the same pot of money. I'm really tired of these rules and everything that they make us comply with as a small enterprise. So he wants to know what your thoughts are on that.
Look, I think there's broad agreement that most of us have on the overregulation. By and large, the market tends to actually sort itself out if you remove regulations. Now, you go back a couple of years, guys, you might remember, particularly in the retail space, whenever shopping centers were put up, we would have these exclusivity agreements that would come in. So you would never have a Pick and Pay and a Checkers in the same shopping center, because as part of the conditions they would put in place to be an anchor tenant, they would actually insist that it be one or the other.
So the market takes care of that.
Well, yeah, and effectively what happened was we had the competition
commission,
which basically said, this is out of bounds, and which is why, by the way, in most shopping centers, game was never able to get a foothold. Game always had a presence outside of the regular shopping centers because of the fact that the big guys would squeeze them out. So I don't necessarily agree with this idea that, if you're putting up a Pick and Pay across from a spa, that you don't create wealth, you only share the money. I think that, in fact, what you are doing there is you're having the net impact of the two competing against each other and driving prices down, which overall is what we want.
Or specialization. One
Exactly.
of them starts to stock different stuff to the other one.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that, by saying that you shouldn't have that scenario, you're actually denying agency to the shoppers. But it's absolutely right in terms of the overregulation. And Phumi, we touched on this where, we said that what's going to happen is that people are just going to set up a number of businesses, each of which, is below the turnover threshold, and each of which employs fewer than 50 people.
People will find a way around it.
Yes, but
it's annoying.
It's annoying because ultimately it's overregulation, and just the sheer effort that you need to put in terms of keeping up with SIPSI and keeping up with SARS and all of those. It's nuts.
It only works for big business, but there are a couple of, and when I read the email that came through, there were a couple of, and you touch on one of them, false equivalents, I think, in this email, right? So, of course, you want a Pick and Pay and a Spa and a Checkers across from each other. For one reason, they employ 3 times as many people, right? Besides the fact that they then also drive down prices because they compete with each other. And there's a different thing, I think most business owners want to see their businesses grow. Most of us want to see our businesses grow.
Sure.
Right. And if growing our business means growing our turnover to a particular way, there are some who look at it and go, I would rather not deal with all of the regulation and all of this stuff. I would much rather have a lifestyle business.
Right.
And so my business has to be below a particular threshold as long as it can live my life. But then there are people who do want their businesses to have 4,000 people. And I have a friend who has a business that big. And they don't think about the regulation as a hindrance. They think about how do I
they
make
hire
my
someone
business...
to make them compliant.
Absolutely,
that's all. They just hire somebody and they give them resources.
They say, how do I make what I want from this business is X. And so to grow the business to this particular size, that's what it is.
Well,
but I do think, and we are in agreement that one of the biggest things that our government can do for small businesses is get out of the way of small businesses. All of the forms, all of the regulations, all of those things. But we cannot then say holistically throw the baby and the water out, because some of these things, we just spoke about how the Competition Commission has actually made life better for all of us by allowing shopping centers to have competing stores in it.
The Competition Commission basically did something that the courts should have done a long time ago.
Really? And they hadn't, but the Competition Commission did the job.
Can I move
regulation?
Can I move us onto something else that, while we've got Jonny here, I think could be quite interesting. I don't know if anybody saw the interviews with Fikile and Julius that were done by BBC Hard Talk.
I haven't seen the Julius.
Okay, I haven't seen the Julius.
I just saw the Fikile one. So let's talk about the Fikile one for a start, because this is where Jonny might be able to give us some sort of insight. I mean, the modern ANC, and I don't expect you to be a revisionist historian here or to try and predict the future, but the modern incarnation of the ANC is so bereft of the sort of leadership that we had at the time of Nelson Mandela. And I don't think that's a controversial thing to say either. We see Fikile Mbalula, who can't answer a single question properly. He makes an absolute mockery of the entire interview process. You almost end up feeling sorry for the interviewer, which is something that should never happen. And I keep thinking how adept Nelson Mandela was at handling the media. And he stood his ground and he said some unpopular things, which really true leaders should be able to do, should be able to say no more than just crowd please. And I even think about Winnie, who used to take huge risks with her PR, whether it was calculated or miscalculated, whether it was self-destructive, or whether it was something that she'd come up with as a plan. What do you make of the two of them and the way that they dealt with the media, and what lessons could be employed by the modern leadership of any of the political parties? Let's not just say the ANC.
I haven't seen either interview, but I've seen a lot of Fikile.
Then you've seen enough. There are no surprises.
We've seen more than we need to.
It's not like you're suddenly going to go, oh, wow, the guy's incredible. How erudite.
I mean, I think it's a question of quality.
Okay.
And and the fact that he's up there in Hard Talk is a sign of the thinness of quality there.
You know what it also is for me when you contrast those people. What Nelson Mandela had is he was a grown up, firstly, with
very good,
but with a point of view. He had a point of view, and he was clear about what he believed in, and he was unshifting from those beliefs. Whereas Fikile, on the other hand, wants to be a celebrity. And a lot of our politicians have become that, right? They all want to be celebrities and want to be seen in a particular way.
Well, to
And so they're
anglicize,
always
just to
trying-
anglicize his name, he's either fickle or he's facile. But to me, those are the two words that must make up some part of his
Gareth,
character.
I've got to take
personality.
exception with something though,
Go on.
because basically, I think, singling out South Africa in this regard is just basically unfair, because what we've seen globally is an overall decline in quality of leadership and the ability of people.
Joe Biden can't spit out a sentence.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you just do a contrast between, Obama, no matter what you might think of his policies, it's exactly what Phumi was saying. He was a grown-up.
Yeah.
And he had the ability to actually conduct a conversation in a rational basis. You might disagree with what he said. Obama's a very good example. You contrast him with modern day successors. And again, you contrast all of the leaders that preceded Boris Johnson to Boris Johnson. And, another example of just how there's been an overall dumbing down of political leadership in the Western world. And if you look at the grown-ups right now, the grown-ups really, where are they sitting? It's Xi Jinping, it's Putin, it's Narendra Modi. Those are, look at Ruta.
The serious people.
Look at Ruta out in Kenya right now. That guy is so impressive in terms of the type of stuff that he's been talking about on the global stage right now. So he was calling out the Western world to say, we've given you a troika of African leaders to represent us. You instead want to engage with 51 of us at a time, and you want us to speak for 1.5 minutes apiece and have a dialogue with you. And it's the level of absurdity that we have right now in terms of the way in which these discussions get conducted. And let's also consider the role of the BBC in this, okay? And so we go back to the Elon Musk interview as a very specific example. The interviewers are clueless. And, to Fikile and Mbalula's credit in this particular case, at the point at which he hit back with a series of retorts that pointed out the fundamental hypocrisy of the West, what happens, as always with the BBC, oops, looks like we've run out of time.
Oh,
so let's move on
okay.
to
Yeah,
something
I didn't
else.
even pick that up.
Yeah, so I think, yes, we recognize that our current crop of leadership, by and large, are buffoons. And I'm very happy to say that in terms of Mr. Razmatan or Mr. Fearfok or whatever he calls himself at any given stage. But, singling out our guys for their inherent stupidity. No, I think that, we're kind of average in terms of global stupidity right now.
Well, at least we're average at that, but not below average.
I think we're below, but
You think so?
I cannot believe that we're going to miss this opportunity, because we do have a person who's just written a book, who's just gone through 3.5 years, you said, of research. Did you spend anywhere near 12.5 million?
Oh, wow. What a story, right?
I just can't. I need to understand from somebody who's just had the fresh experience.
I was surprised by the figure.
That's a lot of money for so all right. So what I want to talk about here is what Phumi and I we were actually having this conversation before we started the Burning Platform this morning about how Herman Mashaba must be fairly desperate for some attention if he paid for this.
Frankly, I cannot imagine why he would have gone through that process. It's clearly an exaggerated understanding of how the book market works in South Africa. Gareth, you've published how many books?
Two. Only two.
Yeah,
I hear you talking to Jonny. He's got about 7 out there.
Yeah, I know, but I'm using you as a very good example because you're a person who has a fair amount of clout in terms of the overall South African landscape, not just the media landscape. But you know as well that the number of people who go out and actually buy books,
it's tiny.
It's absolutely tiny, and there's
tiny.
The possibility of
poor
that.
Johnny's shaking his head. He's like, "Oh God, 3 years."
No, it's baffling. It's baffling that he spent 12.5 million on a book. I mean, it's so obviously not worth it. It's a strange judgment.
I think you're missing the fact that when the statement came out from Mr. Mashaba, it did say an initial 12.5 million.
Good Lord, you mean there was more?
We don't know. We don't know.
Wow.
We've since not spoken about that. But when I saw initial 12.5, I'm still a little bit shook.
Well, I hope you end up making even a half of that. That would be very nice, Johnny. I mean, you've certainly put in the work, and you still have your credibility intact, which we can't really say about the other.
I'll go and buy myself a new shirt.
There we go. No, that's a big story, and I think people are right to make a lot of noise about it.
And by the way, I just want to call out everyone who's actually been sharing PDFs of De Ruyter's book. You know, we constantly go on about the fact that, you know, we despise lawlessness, and I think there's been probably about a dozen people who've sent me PDFs of this stuff. I haven't read it. If I do get down to reading it, I probably won't buy a copy, but I will borrow a copy and read it. But I think it's absolutely wrong, guys. Don't share these.
But we
PDFs.
have spoken about this on this show on countless times. South Africans say they don't like lawlessness. South Africans say they disagree with it. But when it comes down to it, they will pay the bribe. They will initiate the idea of paying the copper bribe. And when the PDFs come around, they will share the PDFs. We say it, but we don't believe it.
I think it's time we started actually walking that walk, guys. You know, really.
No, I mean, as an author, does this annoy you as much as it clearly annoys Canton? I should hope so, because this is your life. This is your bread and butter, right?
Yeah, it is. I think everybody should pay for their book.
Damn right, especially for your book. Oh, it's coming up. You know, again, if we want quality stuff, you've got to be prepared to pay for it. This is what I think people have forgotten. If you want good things, nice things, the reason that they cost money is because they're nice. If you want shit, then go for the cheap and free stuff.
So I do think one last thing on this 12.5 million. A lot of people are saying that it is his money and it is not state money. But I think what it does tell us about the handling of money from Mr. Mashaba is that he doesn't seem to have done the due diligence of what we should be paying for stuff. We spoke a little bit earlier.
And do you
about
really
this.
want a guy who doesn't know the value of money running the country?
And the value of this money, right? This is also what it tells us. This little debacle tells us about this man is his view on the value of money and how it should be spent, or even the due diligence of spending money on particular things. So yeah, it is his money. And now that we're being told it's a loan, I wonder if he did the figure of whether the man is going to be able to pay him back. Or is there something else going on there that we have not yet started thinking about?
Well, I mean, also, poor old Herman, he has to find a way of becoming relevant that doesn't cut down his fortune by 12.5
He had the
rand.
best opportunity to be relevant. You know, he was actually an up-and-coming star in the DA. He was mayor of Johannesburg, and he completely fucked it up.
That's exactly right.
And, you know, I was so sorry that I wasted my vote on him, really.
Well, let me ask you this quickly when we talk about waste. Wastewater has killed 17 people in Hammanskraal in Pretoria. It's also a big story this week. Of course, it won't last very long as a big story. By next week, this time, it'll be forgotten. But this is another example of incompetence and a lack of diligence, maintenance, care, attention. Clearly, the powers that be, whether they're at municipal level, provincial level, or at national level, are not really interested in the welfare of average South Africans. They're interested in whatever they can get out of the deal themselves. This is the kind of venality that we have become used to in South Africa.
Well, there's no consequences, Gareth. No one is going to go to jail.
No.
Yeah, and no one is going to be fined. And it's part of a global phenomenon. I don't know if you guys have been following the story about the eye drops in the US that were released, the contaminated eye drops.
No.
People have gone blind and people have died as a direct result of bacterial infections in eye drops. because of the fact that the company manufacturing the eye drops, I had tweeted the story last week. People have lost their eyesight. They have died as a result of the infections. No one is going to go to jail as a direct result of this. Shout out to the Chinese in this regard. At the point at which someone tried to take baby formula and adulterate it, and people ended up dying, the person was promptly executed.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is the way it should be happening. But we don't have consequences. So this goes back to our other discussion, which is go off grid. So, you need to manage your own water supply. You need to take responsibility for the stuff yourself. Because if you are trusting the state to do this stuff, it's not going to come. And we're good at that as South Africans. I think that we're better equipped than the rest of the world to actually sort out the stuff for ourselves.
But the majority of South Africans are going to have to trust the state, in perpetuity for water. And for me, the Kara story is just terrible. It's a very, very basic function that's gone wrong. For some reason, for me, it's the worst story of the last few months. It absolutely shouldn't be happening. It's the most simple.
No, but we've been saying this is going to happen for the longest time.
So, because we've got like 3 minutes left in the show, and because we are talking about lawlessness, Jonny, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about your other book. I don't know if it's still available in bookstores, about the relationship of South Africans and the police.
Thin Blue.
Yes.
So that was a long, long time ago. In 2005, 6, 7, I went on patrols with South African police. And one of the things I found was how much policing only works when people consent to be policed. And if they don't trust the police, they don't consent. And so you have a patrol begins with a policing plan. This is where the crime spots are. This is the place you should be. The police avoided those spots. They tried to stay away. They didn't want to be among people. They didn't want to be among crowds because they'd experience hostility. So it was a real jolt that if police...
How long ago did you write that book?
It was published, I think, in 2007 or 8.
So clearly things have got a lot worse since then, right?
Absolutely.
Not better.
Absolutely.
And that consent to be policed and that kind of contract between society and the police.
But it comes from trust, Gareth. And if you don't trust the cops,
right?
then why
exactly.
would you do so?
I mean, a lot of this is self-inflicted harm. It's not just that the public have become disenchanted with the police. It's that we've seen over and over again that lack of accountability that you spoke about just a second ago, right? Yeah, I mean, so what's the next project for you? Because you've got so many plates spinning and you've got so many things that you could write about. And this country's, as we said about Nelson and Winnie, rich material.
Well, the next project goes way back into the 19th century. It's about the homosexuality of Cecil John Rhodes. It's the connection between his private life and his life as an imperialist.
Wow. Is there enough material for you to be able to...
I believe that there is.
Really? This is going to be very exciting.
Plenty of
what
material.
An amazing... that's a mic drop moment where we can wait for the next book.
You're going to have to come back for blind history on that.
Unbelievable.
I'd love to.
Well, again, thank you, Jonny. Kantan, Phumi, we will see you next Thursday for more of the Burning Platform.
I'm hoping that there's a default in the US, guys, just so you know.
Are you hoping for that?
Yeah. No, because what happens is when the bond market crashes, the stocks go up. And remember that I'm invested in US stocks.
There we go. All right. Very good.
I don't think it'll happen.
A defaults on Kantan's menu for next week. We hope no more cholera. That's all I'm hoping for next week. Have an awesome day, everybody.